Drink the water. I've led you here. Drink it. Oh, don't sneak that in there. Yeah, don't sneak it in there. That's where you are. You got led in. I'll drink the freaking water. He's a good horse. Because he didn't say no, did he? He said he hates it. Yeah, and there you go. No, I can fix it. Spilo, shut up. I can fix it tomorrow. I just don't want to because it doesn't matter if I fix it because every single tank in 5v5 is similar to Roadhog. So with dimly lit studio, two passionate Overwatch content creators sat across from each other. The screen between them flickering with highlights of past matches. The tension in the room was thick. It had to happen because nobody wants to play this fucking awful style of new tank. That's why it happened. We cut the amount of people that demanded in the queues, and the queues have gone longer and longer for the other one. Because the only way to make tanks interesting is to give them a button that kills everyone on the server. To give them a nuke. So it was bad, Spilo. It was a bad idea from conception because it was concepted not as a skill shot, it was concepted as a way of dueling people and ambushing people. It was bad from conception, right? And then after conception, we tied it into hack and made it even worse. Spilo's calling me.
What do you want? I'm tired. I didn't sleep well. My hair's a mess. My internet sucks.
Hi.
Okay.
Do you not like it, Spilo? I stayed up till 4 AM editing you reading the fanfiction. So that's what I did.
Why? Why would you do that? That was so bad. Was that like legitimately? Was that somebody said that was Chat GPT?
Yeah, it was. I didn't make it. To be perfectly clear, it was not me. I promise you.
Yeah. Okay, buddy. I'll believe it when I say it. What are we talking about here?
I suppose we're talking about health pools. Yeah. So I essentially took all day to just go through the full argument for health pools in terms of 250 versus 200, and I wrote 7 pages on it, and I was like, should I make it into a video? Should I yap about on the stream, or should I just call you up? So yeah, that's where we are. Yeah, so essentially I think that the bigger health pools are staling out quite a lot of the angles because people aren't incentivized to actually put support into those angles in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so
I think that the first I heard of that was I think it was Gunba, a long time ago, talking about how no even point taking the angle of Sojourn because you can't even get the one shot with Rill anymore. So you just get stuffed out immediately. Yeah, I remember hearing that from him. But yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So essentially, the ways that you push people out of angles are either to damage them to the point where they're threatened to take a sharp bit of pressure and die, so they have to unpeak, or to threaten them with lethal enough pressure that they have to unpeak regardless, or to walk to them and get them out of the angle, right? There's the 3 different things. I think that basically what's happening is due to the fact that characters like Mercy, Brig, Zen, those type of characters, the characters that have been specifically balanced in a way that they have a lower healing per second because they are more reliable in their healing output, have not been moved up to adapt to the higher health pools. Essentially what's happening is that there is no reason to actually use them to support an angle. And in situations where before characters like Hanzo would be absolutely fine joining out a Sigma with Mercy on them, even if the Sigma had support from across the map kind of thing. Now in these kind of situations, what's happening is the Hanzo getting chipped down by 60 health, having to unpeak, and then being completely inactive because it takes longer to heal back up to full. That's essentially the broad strokes of the argument.
Yo, somebody just gifted me 40 subs. Give me 1 second. All right. So basically what you're saying is that because the time to kill has gone up for many characters due to the breakpoints, there is less encouragement for taking risks to poke out those angles because the engagement over time, it just basically favors who has the war of attrition more so than anything else on that angle. What type of characters have more sustained output or more sustained pressure or the ability to duel for longer periods of time.
Yeah, so essentially going into Overwatch 2, there was a much bigger impetus on people to support angles on the sides because one person without support, it just dies instantly to somebody with support. So basically characters like Mercy then, Harmony or Brig Pack, stuff like that got really, really good really quickly. And then when season 9 came in, essentially what they did is they made it so that, well, you're not going to unpeak an angle unless you go down to being threatened to die. So essentially, you have to have a much higher healing throughput source onto you. And the downside that characters like Anna and Baptiste and characters like that have the less consistent healing throughput, the ones that can miss, or they got travel time, or they got rounds, so they hit every now and again. Those type of characters, the characters that have to be localized to you, like Moira or Iliari. Essentially, they just got better at doing that type of stuff in comparison to characters like Mercy who had the lower healing throughput specifically because they were more reactive to where the healing sources were. And that kind of half a second, which is the difference between the two characters healing each other up versus waiting for the Ana to realize you're there, stop healing one person, turn over and start shooting you, versus having Mercy instantly healing you and having the lower HPS. has been just kind of removed by the fact that the health pools are bigger.
Right. So you're saying like sustained pressure on an angle matters more.
Yeah. So
Like
essentially,
sustained healing pressures.
yeah,
Sustained healing pressure.
it's so when you've got a bigger health pool, like especially like with the tanks, we found that quite a bit, and you'll probably agree with this. The bigger the health pool is on tanks, the more likely you are to use that health pool in more of a burst at the correct timing, because it's so much more costly to use it incorrectly before or later than you should be, and to basically just squander it and be like heal for the next like
Yeah,
4
well, I mean,
seconds.
the more resource you have, the more responsibility you have, basically.
Yeah. So
Okay.
exactly the same thing, but with DPS. The difference is like the bigger health pools emphasize that you should be like timing the angle perfectly, hitting exactly where you want to, and using that health pool all in one, because it takes a lot of time to heal you back up or a lot of resources to heal you back up. But the smaller health pools emphasize more like constant support to keep you in that angle for a longer period of time. For instance, like the Trace of the Harmony Orb stays in that angle and jewels out a Sigma for like 4 or 5 seconds, versus the new situation where like those sources like Harmony Orb don't really keep you in that angle as much. I think that's quite a lot of the reason why you're struggling with off tanks.
Maybe. I don't know if I agree. I understand your principle, but I think like basically the way I stand it is like post season 9, especially with the heal passive, it becomes you have like these more longer sustained duels essentially where like people have capability to heal themselves, they have larger health pools, and so like oftentimes fighting for space is just a more drawn out process, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, sure.
I understand what you're saying, like in regards to Mercy and Zenyatta, but I think like that's kind of like I'm looking for like something like more holistic, like overall, like the way that the game is played right now is that like you don't take the angle. Hanzo doesn't wall climb, one shot you and then disappear, right? Like he has to kind of, I mean, he can one shot you, but maybe it's a bad example. But
yeah,
there's a more sustained output of pressure from a position.
I think one of the other scary bits is if somebody does time the angle properly, like a Hanzo, with the higher health pools, you are just making it harder to actually push them out with some chip damage by increasing the health pools, right? If they actually hit it correctly, or the Widow peeks at the correct time, or the Widow, for instance, like peeks with a Sigma shield in front of her and you can't chip her out, the bigger health pool actually does make it harder to displace her from that position than to just be able to move her or threaten her with sharp pressure from below.
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to say here is I would be cautious about like when we're discussing this, like I would prefer to talk about like the impact of having larger health pools, and then go, okay, how does that affect how supports play? And really, frankly, even going on like a hero by hero basis, because you know I even caught myself there with Hanzo, because Hanzo can one shot most characters, right? Like that's still is it not
Now.
as many as
Now.
old days, yes, of course, but obviously like there's a lot of characters that haven't really been like they've been kind of had the whole season 9 thing rolled back, so it's like kind of irrelevant. So I mean, I'm up to talk about whatever, but I would probably prefer to like stay in our lane there because it gets confusing otherwise.
Yeah, sure. The other thing that I had just as a point to bring up is the fact that the whole tank busting thing. You said that the tanks as a concept, if they are tank busts, they're bad, and that's obviously like I agree with that entirely. But in terms of like DPS tank busting, I think.
Oh
I think
yeah.
that's a lot less
I'm
problematic.
gonna interrupt you. When
sure.
you were, that was one of the ones I was yelling at you yesterday over because you were yelling at me for saying that 6v6 tank busters. No, I said in 5v5, the 5v5 like the Orissas and the Ramatras and the like whatever, like tank buster as
When
a
that moved over.
concept. It wasn't 5v5 or 6v6. Both sucked. It's worse than 5v5, I think. But like. My point was that like it wasn't that 6v6ers had tank busters. It was like it was also bad in 6v6. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, sure.
I think the tank busting was weaker, but the tank buster heroes were still awful. Like let's put it this way: Roadhog was less annoying to play into in 6v6, 100%, because he died easier, but he was also just like a total waste of space at the same time. Like that was kind of my point. Also, Didact. I remember your freaking name because you were the one that said, "Oh, I played with a broken Venture and decided that 200 HP wasn't the play." No, it was all the heroes. Everybody was like, it wasn't even just me. I asked the people that I pugged with because I started the 66 pugs with the mid, and I also did some higher rank lobbies, and they're like, we want to try the other side as well. And I just wanted to for the integrity of the test. Like I think like I'm not saying that like having slightly faster time to kill is bad. I just didn't feel like it was necessary considering that sustain heroes were overall so much nerfed as a whole. And it turned out that, like, whether it's 200 HP or not, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether the theory of it's good, whether it's bad, it still felt like fun. Like, it wasn't really that deep. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Didact Me made a load of hero reworks. You have to try them at some point. We've essentially fixed most of the problems with the game mode for the most part, such as like Roadhog. Right. We just fixed that. We've made it so Roadhog can kind of like donate his breather to somebody else and give them damage reduction and a heal over time. And it's made Roadhog like a perfect pairing with any of the initiator tanks. So he's not entirely selfish and stuff like that. We have like I can't, and that's the thing. Like, you watch the Roadhog video and you're like, you can't fix him either. And I'm like, I can fix him. There's just no point in fixing him because there's so many tanks that are problematic that I'm like, why in particular would I bother with this guy? And yeah, do you know how you fix him? You make him swing up his hook 3 times before he throws it. And then he's taking damage while he's swinging up his hook. You put a slow on him while he's swinging up his hook. Yeah. People have a chance to react to it, that sort of thing. But there's no point of doing it in this current mode where D.Vas can blow up people with micros. Sorry?
Have you fixed Widowmaker?
Widow's one of these where, like, I agree with Hanzo and Widow. You can literally just put a glint on it and it fixes everything. The things that people get annoyed at with Widow and the things that the devs were trying to fix with Widow and Hanzo in particular were everyone standing on main like idiots in gold, and the Hanzo and the Widow randomly get a kill down main. I think that's the kind of thing they were trying to remove. And I think at least if the glints on main, people would kind of have a reason to know that they exist there instead of just feeling like it's random.
That's true. That's true.
With quite a lot of like the really sharp damage sources, and that was kind of the argument for the Roadhog video, and each one of my videos I try and like isolate a part of Overwatch to talk about, because Overwatch gets so stupidly complicated the moment you introduce other things. But I was just trying to isolate like lethality and like the volatility, sharpness, and telegraphing of pressure from the enemy team, and how that can just make the game awful for the people that are playing into it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I fall on. Like, there's so many psychological things that I don't feel like I have an opinion on, because I need to, like, it's not that I don't think there isn't a fact, like, I hate to fence in on it, but, like, for example, like, how much team reliance is good and how much team reliance is bad. I feel like there's probably an objective answer there. Shut up! I see your freaking Twitch chat. I will find you guys. I will find you.
Spilo, can you say violence, please?
Violence.
Beautiful.
Yes, no violence. No, my whole mindset is that, like, I feel like there probably is an objective answer, but like how much team reliance is good and how much is bad. Like, what's the careful balance that Overwatch wants to find to keep their community happy? And like, yeah, it might not be optimal for a certain percentage of the population, not be optimal for the other percentage of the population, but nothing ever is. I do think that there's objectively a correct answer in that regard, almost objectively, for the majority of players, depending on what they're aiming for. I think that that's the case, right? I also think that what were we just talking about? Like, like lethality, like time to kill. Like, how much do we want the game to be like MOBA-esque? Like, I don't know how much you play Deadlock, but where like time to kill, especially in certain situations, can be like really, really slow versus like everybody has a one shot. Like there's probably, I won't say an objective answer there, but one that objectively makes the most sense for Overwatch. And I don't know that I have quite figured out the answer, and I do think that you'd have to like not just study the game and the game's history, but you'd also understand like what do people enjoy the most, what gives them the most feeling of counterplay and satisfaction, you know? So when I fence in on that stuff, it's not that I don't have an opinion on it. It's also not that I don't think that there's objective truth in that. It's that I don't feel confident enough to say it. And I know, like, basically I'm kind of like knee-jerk reacting to a lot of other content creators, I'm not naming any names, Realth, who, you know, will have like educated opinions, but will state it as fact when we don't necessarily know that's the case. I'm giving you a hard time about that, but you're far from the worst guy. And you're also more educated than 99.999% of people that do that as well.
Thank you. There is that kind of like, I don't like to overstay it, and there is that kind of thing.
It's also good content.
Is implied quite a lot of the time, but I get what you mean. I should state it a lot more. Yeah.
It's just there's some things that like I will say is objectively true, right? Like I was like a bit of an ass when we transitioned to Overwatch 2 in the Overwatch League because I was super egotistical about like, guys, we need to be playing angles like in Overwatch League. I was pushing Chris like all the time. Shut up, the group up is dead. Trust me, we need to be playing angles. We need to be playing angles.
No
like,
WM1 anymore.
Right, trust me, this is the way to play. Like even the support playstyle, me and Egoist Cat were telling all the support players like season 1, no, you just suck. You're fine in support, right? I mean, Egoist Cat made like a video the week of it, and we were talking about like how support's actually good. You're just bad, right? And like I knew that was true, right? But there were some things that it's not even like I said, it's not even that I don't have an opinion on it. I do have an opinion on it, right? It's just that I'm not. I try to not like. I don't like. I kind of have a little bit of a little baby platform now, and I hate having like. I hate seeing other content creators have their little baby yappers going around and repeating their concepts. And so I know it's kind of unavoidable, but I'm like I want people to at least to like question things, you know.
Yeah, well, that's why whenever I make a video, I try and make it about something I don't hear anyone else talking about. It's why I did the and the point is, like, I'm not entirely against season 9 and the health pool changes, right? I made an entire video about how acceleration had basically stalled out the game from the beginning of it, and how the season 9 changes and the bigger hitboxes are really a good thing to make the barrier to entry for the game a lot easier for people.
Yeah, like, I think my big thing with season 9 is I'm not a season 9 defender by any means, so I think that's the key thing for me. It's like I understand what they were trying to do with it, but I do agree that like I don't know like what was the end goal. You know, like eventually they've reverted like a lot of the things that were the most offensive about season 9, which were or the reason why it was done in the first place, which was like, you know, Hanzo one shot. People don't like Hanzo one shot. Let's remove that. Okay, people don't like Roadhog one shot. Let's remove that. People don't like some of the breakpoints with this, and then all those things have just kind of come back. And so now I'm like, okay, well then, what was the point in the first place? So I'm not a season 9 defender. I am a defender of them trying aggressive new things. I have told them directly in the last few weeks here, and I told the developers, it's like, hey, I think you guys should talk about it. I think you guys need to say like, what is our stance on season 9 right now, and like, are we happy with what it's done? I think even using the argument that like, oh, it's a good way to deal with sustain, that's just dumb. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
that's
you
like
just
saying,
fix the numbers at a certain point.
You just fix
the
numbers, right? Right. So I understand. I think it was a creative solution, and I think it was an interesting idea. I think my thing with season 9 is I think people treat it like it's not you specifically, like it's the second coming of Satan or something, and I don't think it's all that bad. I don't think like even the theory of what we were talking about, like where it's like a little bit longer sustain on angles and maybe it shifts some of the power dynamic of the supports. I think it's such an unbelievably minor thing for the most part that I don't think it matters that much. It does matter. It matters more for some characters that have been screwed over by the breakpoints. I will say that.
Sure. The thing that missed me quite a lot at the moment about it is quite a lot of the better arguments that I thought were there for season 9 that they didn't say, like the better onboarding for newer players that they didn't state are the only things actually left in the season 9 patch that they haven't removed at this point. And I'm there like, okay, well, I was on the track for why we should do it, but I don't know if they were to begin with. It's it just missed me a little bit, quite frankly.
Yeah. I agree, and I think like the thing is that they needed to onboard it much better. It's better now than it used to be, but you remember when it first launched, I literally sent the developers a list. I think it might have been 40 or 50 different damage sources that did not get scaled up at the time of season 9 that were not aim related, like Shatter and Pin and Fire Strike and Winston's alt fire and Winston's landing damage and Winston's primal damage. And it's like because they didn't necessarily want to just they wanted to deal with specifically burst damage. And so there's all these damage instances that like just didn't get scaled and we're still catching up to those things.
Yeah, like it's one of those things where you're like, this should be a spreadsheet. Like somebody should have made a spreadsheet of the abilities.
I mean, it took me 15 minutes.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Like it literally took me 15 minutes. You know, so
it's one of those things where like it's not fully thought through or just like a little bit careless in the way it's done. And then
dude, Brig Whipshot and Doom Seismic Slam are tragic. Alt Fire from Winston, Seismic Slam from Doom are like legitimately cancerous. Like it is actually so bad, right? Like how 50 damage Seismic Slam, heck, even Genji Dash, right? So it's like, you know, I think what happens is the reason why our perspective on season 9 has been so negative is because Sumio has been like a big mouthpiece against it, which is good, right? I think a lot of his points are good, but it's because Sumio is a projectile DPS player, where like a lot of those breakpoints really got wonked up. And so like I think like, but I'm not saying that doesn't mean that his points are bad. I'm just saying like that can kind of shift the perspective.
No, I think
so,
it's
like,
good to have like a load of people in the space really emphatically arguing all of their points, just to so you can pick and choose from what you actually believe.
Here's my problem.
Basically.
Here's my thing. I'm honestly I'm doing the same thing for 6v6. I like to pretend anyway, where I'm playing devil's advocate to force the 6v6 community to fix their arguments.
Yeah.
Which frankly sometimes suck. And the same thing goes with Season 9. We freak out about Season 9, but why does Season 9 the issue? We just talked about it right now. It's inconsistent with the breakpoints. It's not consistently applying the same stuff. They've still forgotten a lot of the non-damaged aim sources, and then they've scaled up a lot of the more offensive one-shots right back to where they were pre-Season 9, and so things haven't really changed at all. So what was the entire point, right? Now, that if you want to say, okay, well, the point was, I think somebody in my chat goes, like, more consistent damage output, so like a little bit easier onboarding, like it lowered the skill floor for the game while keeping the skill ceiling intact. That's fine with me, but then that needs to be communicated. That is the, in my opinion, egotistical quality criticism of Season 9, wrapped up in a nice little tidy bow.
Yeah. Let's
same
talk
thing with
flashbang quickly.
Okay, sure.
Before we head right, so tank busted and that sort of stuff for 6v6 game mode. Do you think they are exclusively bad? Do you think they should be put back in some way, shape, or form? Because we're having trouble about a Sigma on an off angle completely blocking it, despite the person having support on that angle. Things like rapid fire, things like fan the hammer, things like flashbang. All of that help to duel that out. Do you think that's a good thing that is still left out? Obviously, be a ridiculous amount of work to re-implement.
This goes back to what I was saying earlier, where, like, again, a lot of the good arguments kind of get lost in the sauce, where it's like anything that was Overwatch 1 was bad, or anything that's Overwatch 1 was good. You find, like, so many people that say that. I think people are like, oh, CC always bad. That's wrong. Skillless CC that doesn't take really any skill to being put in. And now that's not necessarily mechanical skill. It might be game sense skill. Like, I choose to use the CC here, which means I'm going to be weaker later. I think Flashbang might be one of those things where I could see it coming back. I like it better than Hinder, because I think Flashbang had in its design a lot more offensive potential than Hinder.
Yeah.
So you had to make a lot of important choices, because without Flashbang, Cassidy had less offensive playmaking potential, so you could sit on Flashbang and kind of keep yourself alive, but you were outputting less pressure than maybe a Cassidy who used it offensively.
Yeah, I think it's one of those where maybe like you remove flash over shield, and then aside from that, you just reduce the duration, so it's effective against tanks, but not incredibly effective.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if I don't even think the flash versus shield. I mean, there's counterplay versus that, I think that's kind of like...
I never happened in low ranks anyway.
I think the reason why people don't like the whole, like, Cassidy matchup with flash is more because they don't like the flash fan. If you take away fan the hammer, like, I don't think that's going to be a huge issue. I don't think that's maybe a huge issue, but I think flash is, like, relatively, like, was a relatively inoffensive CC by itself. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It wasn't even consistent in winning the 1v1, because a lot of times, like, the way the character hitboxes moved. I mean, we can all remember the horrendous hybrid clip from the London Spitfire Season 5, where hybrid flanks, flashbangs, the Tracer's head moves back, then forth, he misses both shots, right? I think Overwatch 1, flashbang was, like, a great example of, like, one of the CCs that probably could have stayed. But because CC bad, we just brainlessly remove it and replace it with something infinitely worse. And, like, that's the kind of argument that, like, gets my goat, because it's like, that's a great example of just, like, where we paint with a broad brush. This is why I fence it, right? Because you can't say CC is bad, you can't say CC is good. It depends, right? Sleep Dart, great. Accretion, great. Flashbang, probably fine. Hinder, terrible. Javelin?
Yeah, there's a lot of context in there, isn't there?
Right.
To actually work out whether they're good or bad.
Right, exactly. Like,
and you say, like, they have to be skillful and stuff like that, which
they have to be skillful.
I don't think is necessarily always true, but it's a good, like, starting point to work from with everything.
Yeah.
You always need to be checking it again.
But when I say skill, again, it's not about skill of application, but skill of, like, strategy. In other words, if I just throw my flashbang, I will get punished for it either directly or indirectly.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
If I use my flashbang, just like, if I just throw it's like an honor, right? If I just throw my sleep dart out, I might die. If I just use my accretion, like, for example, if I'm playing Sigma into Ryan and I throw an accretion on an angle and I miss it, the Ryan pins me and I'm dead, right? Like, that's kind of like the indirect punishment that I want to have with CC.
Yeah, can I upset your chat and talk about charge cancel?
Yeah. I mean, it's something that we disagree on, so I'm
yeah. No, I thought.
I disagree on, but I'm gonna be honest. It's one of those things that I haven't thought about enough. So,
Yeah. So the essential argument that I was trying to make in the Roadhog video is pretty simple. The tanks have the option of throwing themselves at DPS on angles, right? They have the option of doing that, whether it's good or bad. So in the low ranks, sometimes that's going to happen. And if that happens in the low ranks, and the tanks are lethal enough to be able to kill that DPS on the off angle, in the low ranks, the low rank players are more likely to think that's a bad idea, even if it's not to stand there, and to go back to me. And that will stale out positioning. That's kind of like the argument I go with. In terms of mid to high ranks, I think it's kind of like an issue of the tanks just being nigh unkillable and just being able to run around the map at the moment. But
so let me clarify. You're saying that it's the idea that if I split from my team, I can be chased and punished by a tank, kind of that can discourage.
Chased and punished specifically in a way that causes your death instead of causing you to move. So like with charge cancel, there's a simple thing that me and Didac did with the code that we use for our pugs. Which is every time Ryan cancels charge, he literally has like a 2-second, 30% speed slow. So he can't chase you around a corner. So you can charge at somebody, you can push them out, but you can't kill them.
It's an interesting idea. I think the big problem with charge cancel is the indirect. Ryan takes damage when he pins. Malga doesn't. And I think that's a good design because even using pin is a risk, even if you do cancel it and block whatever.
Yeah, but Ryan is getting to the point where it's almost
but this is my point.
On cooldown, press the charge button, isn't it?
Depends on the composition.
In gold. If you're a gold player, and
In a ranked environment, more often than not, but it's very. You takes a lot of skill to know where to use it because a lot of people. It's oftentimes not so much about pinning a target, but pinning a position, right?
Sure.
I think that maybe some of the people's problems with charge is just because they're exacerbated by having 700 HP of armor right now. So maybe it's
there's no counterplay, no punishment.
Right, it doesn't feel like
Ryan can do that more often.
It's the same thing with Winston at times, right? Where I think Winston committing a cooldown is a risk, or ball slamming, right, is a risk, but it doesn't feel like a risk with the current state of tank HP pools right now. So I understand. I think basically your suggestion is something that I would want to see reevaluated once like health pools were at a more manageable spot. I don't hate it objectively though. I mean, the logic stands.
Okay. Because my argument kind of like goes to all kind of like lethal sources from tanks, like Javelin Spear from Orisa. I think it's kind of like crazy that Orisa can just spin into the enemy team, fortified Javelin Spear to squishy, and almost guarantee a kill quite a lot of the time in gold if they can hit a spear. And the counterplay for the squishy is like null and void, that it just did none for that type of thing. Right. I think that type of thing for tanks to be able to do is kind of like oppressive to specifically low rank players.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's not a good play, but the fact that it's possible is weird. Yeah, I agree.
Cool. That's good. What else do I have for this? Yeah, so essentially the argument is that if you are on 250 HP and you're trying to duel out a Sigma on an off angle, you're actually at more of a disadvantage than you would be if you were at 200 HP with some sort of support in both scenarios, and the Sigma is doing slightly less damage. Because you are more likely to be able to be constantly healed back up, more likely to be able to constantly like repeat that angle and keep going back into that Sigma and keep demanding attention. Or actually win that duel in general, than you would be at 250. At 250, you're kind of like demanding half the resources from your team in order to do that duel. But at 200, it's kind of like the Mercy just taps you every now and then, and you can keep going back in. It's the rubber banding effect of the position that I really think is bad for the 250 HP format, particularly in 6v6.
I don't fully understand. Are you saying that basically, you're basically saying like when you're 200 HP, you demand support, and so that demand for support allows you to clear the angle easier than 250 HP without support?
No, I'm saying that if you are 250 HP and you do the same duel against a Sigma, you will, instead of going in, taking damage, backing out, and then just being back in, back out, you're more likely, because of the higher health pools, to want to use your stuff in a burst, in which case the Sigma can completely shut you out of that angle by using maybe just rock on you at exactly the time. And then the amount of support it requires from your team to get you back into that angle or back doing stuff is such a disproportionate amount that they may as well not try. And that's why the angle's stalling out quite a lot. Compared to on if you were 200 HP and you were pushing into that Sigma, the Sigma uses rock on you. Even if that hits and Mercy's left clicking on you, you're not going to die just to the Sigma. Realistically, you're going to be back in that angle in maybe 2 seconds instead of the 4 that it would take for 250 HP.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't feel like I completely. I understand kind of what you're going with it, but I don't fully agree. I understand your argument that it takes longer to heal people back to full with 250 HP, so there's more of like there's maybe more of a cyclical approach than that. But I'm not even sure that things happen more in a burst with 250 HP because if anything, having a slower TDK means that there's a more drawn out engagement. So I'm not sure I fully understand.
Okay, I don't think I can rephrase it right now, so we may as well.
Fine, that's fine. It's the Atlantic gap.
Yeah,
it's the American school system failing.
I think quite a lot of the time, the way that I think about the game kind of like boils down to the kind of like the different types of resources you can have in the game, and the idea that like some resources can heal instantly, some resources can have more healing per second because they can't heal instantly and they don't have that reactiveness, and you have to have the skill to actually hit them. And the third type is like the bursty resources, which can be used to like big like reinforce the pressure cycle or to like stop the enemy team putting pressure into you. And I put quite a lot of the analysis that I do for the game through like that lens, so it can be quite hard to get people on my page if I don't already have them, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I understand. Like you're 3 steps ahead of me, and I'm still like struggling with step 1.
No. Yeah, in terms of 250 HP, I think that was essentially the argument I wanted to get across, that it was going to be particularly harder to fight the positions because you can't rubber band into that position quite as much if the angular support isn't as good because the healing per second is lower or the healing per second hasn't been accounted for the 250 HP pools. I do also think like you can't fix it because if you did increase Mercy's healing per second to like maybe like 72 it needs to be ish in order to be able to heal in the angle the same way that an Ana heals in the angle, and that's like the pocket Cassidy or Hanzo on a corner kind of situation. Then the Mercy's got completely different priorities. The Mercy may as well more so just heal the tank if they're brawling at exactly the same time. Whereas Mercy at the moment, and the way I like Mercy, it's like 2/3 of the time she wants to be more or less supporting an angle. And that's kind of like the sweet spot why I like her. And I don't think that's fixable with the higher HP numbers. And that's why I'm kind of like miffed by it.
I think one of the more interesting arguments against Season 9 was the fact that because it takes longer to heal people back to full, you are often, and there's less burst reward for taking an angle. We kind of talked about this earlier. Sometimes it can feel less rewarding to take a higher risk, high reward for play. And there's more time spent healing people to keep them within a certain threshold. I think part of that has been counteracted a little bit with the heal passive, a little bit. And also with tuning the DPS passive since its initial launch. But it's a fair argument. I don't really know what the way to like balance that out is. I mean, this is something that I remember this exact same argument. It's a different game type, but in the MMO, I used to play a lot of MMO PvP, and it was like, how much of your survivability do we want through like raw mitigation versus how much of your survivability do we want through like healing? How much of your survivability do we want through your health? And they all have like arguments for them. Like the healing argument is that it becomes a skill check off of your supports, which is good, right? But obviously can be a problem where it is impossible to kill somebody who is actively being healed. The argument against mitigation is that while it puts more emphasis on the person being targeted, it could also put them in a situation where, in combination with healing, they become almost invulnerable during specific windows of time. The argument against health pool is that if you make a bad cooldown trade, there's really no way to kind of like get it back. Like you're kind of screwed essentially. Like if you take a bad health trade, right, it takes too long to heal you back up to full. There's no mitigation, there's no
and you're being costly at the wrong time,
and you're being costly at the wrong time. And it's also like one of the less interesting things is just having an inflated health pool. It's not, so I actually don't. I think basically my stance is that like it has to be some calculation of like combination of the three, where you need individual agency through some of self-mitigation, relying on your teammates partially, and having a health pool that's fun. I mean, it's just good game design. It's like finding that sweet spot, right? I think right now there's certain characters that rely too much off of their mitigation and not enough off of health pool, and vice versa. And I think some characters even have either too much healing or not enough healing. I think a good example of that right now is, I think, Zenyatta Harmony Orb. It's not Harmony Orb's fault, but Harmony Orb has gotten to be such a like completely worthless amount of healing on a tank health pool right now that it's honestly not even worth using. Whereas in Overwatch 1, it was
barely worth using on a DPS either, to be fair.
Right.
With 30, it's just...
Right, with Overwatch 1, it was at least like a thought process of like, okay, it's probably better on a squishy for sure, but like maybe my tank is in a more aggressive position. But like right now, it's like the tank health pools have inflated more proportionately to their DPS and healing counterparts. So now that 30 healing per second, especially because they permanently have DPS passive, it's not that good. And I think like that's kind of like where you can start to see like, I'm not going to use the word power creep, but like structural, almost feels like a continental shift. Like stuff has shifted away from its original intention, and stuff breaks as a result.
Yeah,
and so
I'm pretty sure that's.
You have to kind of.
Sorry, I think that's to my point too. Like, you can't really increase Baptiste Rana's healing past that cap. Like, they're already at the cap; they're not going any higher. So what you have to do in order, with the higher health pools, in order to make the other healers relevant, is just to squish them together. And if you squish these characters together, then all you're doing is you're reducing the design space that you can make healing per second abilities in, right? And
you have to address the outliers. You have to address the outliers, because if you try to balance around the outliers, like I think a great example is the Season 9, right? If you try to balance around the Widows and the Hanzos, or even like the Kirikos, right? Like the 2-tap with Kiriko, right? Then what ends up happening is we talked about the list of the 50 list, right? Where there's 50 things that you forgot to mention, and now we have to go back. And people talk about like power creep. Like, why is power creep so bad? It's actually not from a design or a theory standpoint. It's actually, there's nothing wrong with power creep. If everyone gets stronger at the same level, it's fine generally. It doesn't really, it's like 2 to 4, 3 to 5, 4 to 6. It's the same gap, right? It's fine. The problem comes in the development stand, because something always gets forgotten. Yeah. That's the problem.
Every time there's a big shift, like 20% of things are missed every single time. And I don't think that's like a criticism of Blizzard. I think that's just a thing that's always going to happen. Just they have to be.
It's
really
psychological.
These big shifts.
It's psychological because people often like things to go up, and so positive is better than negative. So there will almost, I've been around a long time, and there is almost universally a bias towards power creep in every game that I've ever played ever. Yeah. So I think the idea is that like it's just like power creep is bad because it always breaks something, not because people getting like, if you gave everyone 20% more damage, 20% more healing, it would be the same, except for the fact that like the anti-nade would damage points, and then there's certain it's like what would be forgotten. There would be something forgotten.
The trouble is it just forces you to keep tweaking things that were already fine but have been made.
Yes, that's it exactly. That's because like now we're talking about like Harmony Orb doesn't do enough healing, but the solution is not to buff Harmony Orb necessarily. The problem is tank health pools, or the problem is something also along those lines, right? So it's like you have to address this is why like I've said this so many times in so many balance videos, where you have to know what the problem is, because if you address the wrong things, not only do you not really fix the initial problem necessarily, but you actually create more work for yourself. Like you create more problems that you then have to go and fix.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna back end this with, I don't think Season 9 can be removed. Not by like whether they can do it. Of course they can do it if they really wanted to, but it's that kind of thing where I do think quite a lot of the aiming system had been made so much easier with Season 9 that essentially what they've done is they've accounted for the fact that they've removed a lot of low skill aiming characters in the past, like Torbjorn and Symmetra, by doing Season 9. There's one of the things people have adjusted to it now. And now you can't, once you give someone a toy, you can't really go back, especially when going back to isolate the most, like, I don't know, most
the key thing,
part of your play.
Can you imagine how many times that shot would have hit in Season 12? Like that's going to be the thing that you can't really, I don't think you can go back on that. I think the breakpoints is a fair point, but I think that one's like, I actually think it's more just like people are going to be so mad that they're not going to be hitting the shots that they used to. It's going to like throw people off. So, and that's why I don't think you can fix the lethality on tanks as well. Like you can't take away Roadhog's ability to insta-kill. People just stop playing him. That's just it. The people that are playing him are playing him to insta-kill now. Like that's how it is. Okay.
With Reinhardt, people are playing it because you can be a bit more lethal on the character.
I've heard this argument before, a similar argument before. I think as a global thing, you do have to be careful, yes. But on an instance by instance basis, I have no problem making all the Roadhog mains quit. I have no problem making all the Moira mains quit. I think it was Daniel Finner. We had this discussion on one of the group up podcasts, and he was talking about Moira, and he was like, "Oh, but all the Moira players, you think you're seeing this one?" I'm like, "Yeah, well, they're wrong. Like, they're dumb people. Like, I don't like this is where we don't fence it, So you're wrong. Like, because the thing is that like when you look at a character like Roadhog, And this is where I'm always have been. You have to just take a stance as a developer. You have to say, people don't like when Orisa is strong. People don't like the way that Moira is being played. People don't like the Sombra playstyle loop. I know there's people out there that like it. I know that they're out there that are very passionate about it, and there's a large and dedicated community. But buddy, you're not big enough. Sorry. And that's it. And like you're gonna, because the thing is you don't just think about the people that are hurt by that playstyle, because that's the obvious one. Like, you know, do the math, how many people hate Moira versus how many people love Moira, and how many people, but also think of all the Moira players that aren't playing Moira because she's the way that she is right now.
Yeah, no, that's true.
I never played, you know, go ahead. I never played Brig, for example. I never played Brig in Overwatch 1. I never touched Brig. I hated Brig. She's my third favorite support in Overwatch 2, right? Because of what they did, you know?
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. I just think we power crept tanks in the direction of being able to get more hit markers and more kill markers, right? And once you go to that direction, you can't take it away without some portion of the tank player base quitting the role. And that's just kind of like a non-starter at this point.
Exactly.
It's just a non-starter in any way. So at this point, we've got like a diva that can insta-kill people with micros from a reasonable distance. Is that good for the... probably not, but... realistically, can we remove it? How many of the diva players will quit? Can we do similar things to every single character? And that's why I say, like, why should I fix Roadhog? What's the point of fixing Roadhog? We have so many like very similar things that are happening in the game, like Orisa Javelin, stuff like that. All the things that I obviously hate, like charge cancel, that are just nice, good feeling things for players and things that make players want to play.
Right.
And I do think one of the travesties of going to 5v5 originally was just the fact that tank players get less AoE hit markers and their abilities to cleave more people. Because that's one of the big like gameplay loop things.
Well, I guess that's where you're going to fence it, and I'm not. I'm much more willing to be like, sucks to suck, guys. This is objectively bad for the game. At least I think so. So you're wrong, and that's how it goes. You know, like whereas like you're right. Like I look at like something like a charge cancel, and my stance in charge cancel is not just because it feels good, but because I think it's like, yes, it is harder to punish for sure, but it doesn't. It fits. It gives the character more options. It increases the skill. If it has not enough counterplay, then we can reflect that in his health pool. It's fine. We can adjust the balance of character elsewhere. But a thing like Diva doing too much damage with micro missiles, well, sorry, Diva mains, it's going away. Or like, you know, Diva needs her 3.5 second or 3 second matrix, whatever. Sorry that that's going away. Like I'm more willing to hurt people's feelings if in the long run I think it's better for the game.
Who wrote down that number 3.5 seconds? Who did that?
I legitimately I remember reading that and just being like, dude, we are so cooked, man. We are so cooked.
Oh my god, I just can't believe it sometimes. It's, and that's why I struggle. That's why I struggle, right?
That's my biggest issue. My biggest issue,
criticism, and work it like that, and I'm just like, Argh.
Well, it's always Ting too. I was talking about, I mean, you saw the podcast with Sam, and it was just like the locker room. I was like, the thing with Tanks is we're trying things with Hinder. You know, we're trying things with all the Sojourn and you know, some hits, some misses, but with Tank, it just feels like we just never go anywhere. We just flounder around and make zero progress whatsoever. And I think that's my biggest problem with
it's the fact that
Tank.
It's one step forward, one step back kind of situation instead of just like any progress in any direction.
Just try stuff, you know, like your whole thing with the pin cancel thing, you know, like that's not exactly the direction we'd want to go. I know they wouldn't go that way, but like at least I'd be like, I would want to play that. I want to try that. Let's give it a shot. Like let's give Roadhog the weird vape thing. Let's give Diva you know, faster movement speed and cut matrix duration in half, or let's like let her remech faster. Like let's just people aren't happy right now, and like you got nothing to lose. Like why? I feel like nothing. It's been like super basic, cowardly. You know, not cowardly in terms of like. At least that's the impression I get. I don't. That's kind of a rude adjective.
I wouldn't have to get out my shield today.
It feels cowardly in terms of what they're like, so much less willing to try stuff with Tank, despite it being like the most problematic role. Like you really have nothing to lose.
Okay, so at least one last thing. In terms of the play rates of heroes, how much of that do you think is down to the population distribution of characters in those roles? Just in terms of like when we started having like four supports and one wasn't a support, 5 tanks, etc., and how that progressed.
Oh, as in like the population of Overwatch, how many support tank DPS characters. Okay, so rephrase say the initial question again.
Yeah, how much do you think that the weighting of whether people play different roles is based on the number of heroes in those roles?
Oh, I see. Jeez, like, I do think it has an impact. I really do think it has an impact, but I don't know if it's an impact. Okay, it's a weird way of looking at it. So, support, I think, is the most popular role. Support or damage, usually.
Yeah, supports have a massive player base from MMOs and other stuff like that. Lots of people love the
Yeah,
support in general.
people love to support, right? Like, even I was a support player, more of a utility damage kind of a guy, but back in the MMO days. But like, I think the idea of like having two different responsibilities always made it a little bit more interesting for me.
Yeah.
The problem with Overwatch 1 support, at least for me, was I just hated all the support heroes except for Zenyatta and Ana. I thought they were all boring. Brig was boring, Mercy's boring, Bap was boring. Lucio was not boring, but was like not my cup of tea. And so you basically, I think, I hate to say this, but it really felt like there was like 2 or 3 interesting support heroes in the entire cast.
No, 100%. Yeah. And then we had like you should have been Mercy kind of songs coming out, and the supports were the big thing. And I know people didn't yet realize that you actually had to play tanks. They didn't realize why tanks were important back then. But like supports were the ones everyone was talking about in terms of population.
Right. Exactly. And then tank was fun, and I think tank is fun for a decent portion of people. But a lot of the tanks were really boring. Like Orisa was really boring. Or just really bad. Like Ryan was just never really felt all that good for large portions of Overwatch 2, and second was okay, but long story short, like that's why you had so much Roadhog. It's like, well, all these characters are bad, so even if I might as well play a bad character that I can have fun with. So
and DPS players had priority
and DPS players, right? Of course. Which is I really do think
I think the priority pass was a massive faux pas. I think that really skewered numbers in a way that we can't quantify.
Yeah.
I think it had a massive effect.
So the weird way of I looking at it right now is that I think the support population is larger than probably both roles, or at least competitive with DPS. But it still has a relatively small hero pool to pull from. Like right now, again, I really only have 3 or 4 heroes that I'm interested in playing in the support role. Juno was awesome, and you saw what happened when Juno was meta. Like now... So, I mean, I remember support queues were like double all the roles. It was insane. So you have not only So not only is the support role like popular, then now you make an actually like really fun support character to play, and it's just absurd, right? And I think damage is kind of an interesting case study because damage is obviously like a pretty popular role as well, but damage also benefits from having a large number of at least interesting characters to try. Like there's like, even the Junkrat again every now and again is fun, right? So like there's a lot of different characters you can play. So whenever even today, whenever I queue DPS, the reason I want to queue DPS is because I want to play different stuff. That's why I queue DPS. When I play support, when I queue tank, or DPS, usually DPS, it's because I want to play a bunch of different characters. When I queue support, it's because I want to play Zen, or I want to play Ana, or I want to play Juno.
Yeah, I think it's partially like the hero fantasy and the amount of like effort they put into the heroes as well. The fact that Juno got so much of an advertisement and so much more budget than any other hero. The fantasy is like part of it, and then I do think there's a saturation effect on the amount of different types of playstyle within the role. That you get to. I think tanks nearing that saturation in terms of like they have like 7 different initiated tanks at the moment that just like do a button and walk into the enemy team, then walk backwards.
Also, I'm gonna break your community's legs with a baseball bat. You can get credit for finalizing and fine-tuning your terminology, but somebody in the freaking comment section was like, oh, you stole the enabler. Bro, Octank has been known as an enabler since freaking 2018. That's why why do you think people are like, oh, wow, Diva enabling Winston? That is a brand new concept that Realth came up with, right? It's like,
I may as well grind my axe from like 5 years ago then. Now that we're talking about it, which is essentially, I think that Orisa never should have been called a main tank. I think Orisa was specifically shoehorned into the main tank category by just buffing her until she could get there. I think Orisa was the cause of most of the trouble in the game, and Roadhog, Sigma, and Orisa specifically were a different type of off-tank that didn't reinforce the initiator and should have been called something different from the start.
I mean, it really goes by like, what's your definition of an off tank or main tank? So
yeah,
I
was
understand
watching a video the other day, and you were like, "Well, the off tank's everything else," and I was like, "Damn, use words."
Well, off tank for me, basically, there's 2 definitions of off tank for me where she could really split, but for the simplicity of the video, I didn't. Off tank is either something that directly complements a tank in taking a space, or somebody else taking a space. In the case of Zarya or Diva, right? Bubble Matrix, you have ways of support. that can be used for yourself, but is often used better to help somebody else, right? I think Reinhardt Shield is a great example because you can support your team, but it's just better for yourself. It's just used for you, and that's, and then it is the other definition of an off tank is not an initiator. Like there's tanks like Sigma that like there's tanks like Sigma that are like, you know, he's not really an initiator. He's a little slow. He doesn't have that violence that the other main tanks have. I'm just fan servicing your chat at this point. But he also doesn't really enable another tank, at least directly. It's just more about like offing on control, which is similar to what a Roadhog does,
they used to enable the DPS to stand in bullshit places, and that was they were basically supporting the DPS instead of supporting the tanks as the off tank, right? They were pushing out angles so the DPS could stand there, or they were shielding the DPS in so they could stand there, and that's why I always said Orisa wasn't really a main tank. She just played like that.
Sure. The only reason that I could see Orisa being a main tank, and you saw my video, was the fact that the shield allowed her to use halt to displace and to set up her own plays. Basically, it's like she was able to, like, yes, it was for her team too, but even if you ever played Orisa in a solo queue environment, which was kind of my guilty pleasure later on Overwatch when I just loved halt, it's like you used it as an initiator. It just wasn't necessarily the most violent initiation ever, but it was an initiation. You set up your play.
The reason why I was upset about this part, okay, I'll explain it real quick.
I didn't notice this part. I'm not gonna lie with you guys. When I see 2 hours and 10 minutes, I'm like, all right, man, I'm gonna. No, I can't do this, man. Please.
Okay, the reason why I'm annoyed about Orisa in terms of initiator is that Orisa doesn't accept resources from other characters in exactly the same way. She's not a conduit for like Zarya.
That is true.
And things
well, she's not mobile enough. She's not mobile enough, I think.
But if she was in her Hulk shield form, she still wouldn't want to accept resources in the same way. She'd still rather poke from a good position that's at a good angle rather than go into the team. And as you get close to the team, you're more at liberty of damage and cooldowns and other things like that.
That is true. That is true. I mean, initiators as a whole are usually proximity based. That's why when I did my whole tank video a long time ago, it's like, you know, the problem of tank is that proximity. It's psychological. You know, it's like it's forcing you to shoot me because you're scared of me because I'm right next to you. And so with Orisa, that was never really the play style.
I love it when you talk about psychology. It makes me so happy.
The reason I do it is because I try to listen.
Yeah.
I've tried to legitimize the criticisms of Overwatch. That's been my mission for like the last I guess almost really 2 years now. It's like, let's stop saying this is broken or balanced or boring or not fun, or let's legitimize the reason why. And now I got a bunch of like cringy Overwatch philosophical rants on my YouTube recommended channel from, you know, random tier 3 players. But you know, at least people are trying to put some effort into their criticisms, because I mean, you remember it was just it was always those crappy stuff.
I think you're right. I think you're right with the psychology, specifically in terms of balance and specifically in terms of tanks. But I think that is a thing you do in order to make the low rank people do the thing that is correct. And I think at high ranks, the thing that is actually correct needs to connect in the middle to this. And I have a bit of a trouble with you saying like, I don't know, like maybe Reinhardt needs to be imposing and take threat and get damage, because realistically, quite a lot of the time it's contextual as to whether shooting Reinhardt is actually a good thing. So maybe this, like what is actually good and what feels good, doesn't connect because it can't always connect because it's contextual. So like that's one of the one things that I always say whenever you talk about it.
Sure. I mean, I've always been a fan of like trying to make what is good and what feels good to be as close as correct as as you possibly can. And I think like my argument for 5v5 was basically largely revolving on, if 5v5 is going to function from a theory, it must make tanks less psychologically imposing.
Yeah. I find it a hard argument though, because they should sometimes be psychologically imposing when they're good to shoot, and sometimes they shouldn't. So I'm like,
I agree. I agree. I'm not saying it's even necessarily possible, but that has to be the theory of what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I'm getting affected by psychology.
Yeah, I'm giving him the fence. Look, Ralph, look how cozy this fence is. It's soft and looks nice.
No. Well, that's the thing. Like when I make content, what I want to do is I want to make a spirited argument about an idea that I have, right?
I think it's good.
And yeah, I ignore too many, like, this is my opinion and other stuff like that
Yeah,
in there.
there's two ways to look at it. There's either I'm presenting an argument, almost like a discourse, like a research paper. Like you did those school projects, right? Where like you have to defend a point. You have to like, it's practice framing your arguments and forming a cohesive argument. And then there's having like a conversation like we're having, where we have maybe two slightly different. I think for you and I pretty much see eye to eye 99% of stuff, but basically having a conversation with somebody that may or may not fully agree with you. It's like just a different way of handling things. My problem has always been knowing that the people that I'm criticizing are probably watching the video. So how am I going to phrase this?
That doesn't matter to me at all.
Right. Well, I know it doesn't matter to you,
Yeah.
but it matters to me. And I think the other thing as well is because then, like I said earlier, people then take the argument and then mimic it without really fully understanding why it's the case, right? So I think like trying to provide, being devil's advocate even to myself, just so that the people understands the weaknesses or potential foibles of my argument, you know?
Yeah, it's very easy to be a bad influence on the internet, especially when you're saying things in jest.
Right, exactly.
Or when you're joking around and calling someone a dumbass and stuff like that.
I have people say, there was something, I remember people used to say like, oh, Spilo says never to shoot the tank, which was not true. There's like a lot of arguments that have just like been taken totally out of context. And I'm like, it's really easy to blame the person for mishearing, which is usually the case. But I think as much as you possibly can, trying to like don't enable bad faith arguments is kind of like the way I like to look at it.
Yeah, the moment you criticize anyone or say anything that's like stilted in any way, weirdly enough, all the people that actually believe that come straight out of the woodworks and start making that argument in your comment section.
Oh yeah,
like takes 5 seconds. So yeah.
Oh yeah.
Exactly. I made a video on flats and 7v7, and like literally instantly 5 comments of flats is stupid. It's like, what?
Yeah.
I didn't even have anything on here.
Yeah. People do that all the time. It's in every single comment section of every single video of mine. So it is what it is. Now the question is, are you gonna come back and react to this one for another 4 hours?
Well, yeah, you're a TikTok streamer. I'm a React streamer. So yeah.
I got called a Reddit coach in Boger's chat yesterday, so that was a new one for me. A Reddit coach, TikTok coach, Twitter coach, YouTube coach, Contenders coach, Overwatch League coach. Somebody called me something else that was totally unrelated to coach. Was funny. He's like the yelling streamer or something. I don't remember what it was. It was something that was new. So
you're just a debate bro, and I'm doing the empirical testing to falsify your ideas. That's what's happening right now.
Yeah, basically. All I do is I just like steal your arguments and present them as like, I had this great idea the other day. What about initiating?
That's what everyone does.
Like, yeah.
What's wrong with people?
Yeah. There's a couple of people out there that people will. I have the whole Hammer Time channel, and I will like occasionally see some of these like video essays get dropped in, and oh my days, I actually ended up having to basically blacklist 6v6 videos because they got so bad. They were so repetitive. Nobody had a unique or clever argument. They were legit just ad revenue. That's all they were.
Yeah.
See, that's the kind of stuff that kills me, because I start like, dude, I hate these freaking 66ers, man. I'm like, dude, what am I saying? Wait, I'm like, the argument starts getting poisoned by like, that's what I was talking about earlier. Like, the argument legit gets poisoned.
I'll load one up and I'll spend like 1 minute on it. I'll be like, oh, same thing.
It's the same thing, yeah.
Same thing.
No. Realth's videos are good. Realth's videos are always good because, like you said, you always come up with a unique idea or unique concept. Like that's what I'm looking for.
It might not land, or you might get 3/4 of the way through and lose my train of thought, and I didn't present it well enough.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm just stupid and you'll enjoy yourself learning about what I want to say.
Right. Well, your Roadhog video was good. Like, I think your whole like concept of like it being like catering to DPS players and like why it's bad, and like, I think one of the things that really stood out to me is the fact that like it punishes the instance of lost focus. And like how that's so incredibly hard to balance around, similarly to Widowmaker, where you're like, I could have avoided that hook, but like there's no other character that I have to be on my toes 99% of the time, and every 6 or 7 seconds he's going to punish that lack of awareness. It's just very unfriendly to play versus, which was like, dude, that's actually such an interesting point. And that's what I look for.
And is that really a type of hero you want to be balancing around in the first place? Like,
right?
Is this just a bad idea? Like,
I think
this sharp pressure on someone with access to it. Just good.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, it was really interesting, and I always like your stuff. So, it's kind of funny because it's like, dude, I remember seeing your stuff. We never were like friends or anything, but I remember seeing your content from like years ago, like years and years ago, and then like seeing it come full circle is just funny.
Oh, I was absolute trash. I had no idea what I was doing, so it was not worth watching anyway. But I'm glad you spent the time.
Yeah, mate. Well, any last problems to solve?
No, I think I'm okay. Did you fake your internet cutting out yesterday when you read the fan fiction?
No,
and then went
actually,
offline?
you could see the additional stream
Yeah.
afterwards. It was definitely laggy. There was no sort of discomfort. I was totally
were like,
comfortable,
"It's breaking
totally
up. I
chill.
can't
No,
stay
I was. Everything's fine. I definitely did not pull out the plug with my toe or anything like that.
Yeah.
It was fine. Can we have one more violence or psychology before the departure? What if I said psychological violence? Like psychological violence.
That's I can use that in videos.
Psychological violence.
Beautiful. All right, man. Love you very much.
Love you too, man.
Thanks for talking to me. I'll see you around. Cheers.
Cheers, brother. See ya.